Good evening, everyone. How are you?
This very important panel. Eh, y sobre todo, como decimos en Colombia,
Especially as we say here in Colombia, this luxury panel.
we, uh, in this panel and on this stage, speaking of such an important matter as unlocking public and private investments in addressing migration in Latin America. We are in the face of unprecedented regional migration. Colombia is poised to serve uh, for the region and for the world as an example in terms of how we lead and how we manage our migration crisis. Everything that will happen in the next 10 years will define the history of how we handle this very relevant and difficult situation. However, there are tremendous opportunities, and for that, we are here to speak with Felipe Muñoz. I say to him that he is the Chief Executive Officer of Migration in Colombia. He is el gerente de la frontera. He is the person that is in charge of dealing with our migration policy and all of the migration activities. We have Carol Thompson O'Connell, Acting Assistant Secretary, Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migrations of the U.S. Department of State. Thank you, Carol, for joining us. And we have Rafael de la Cruz, a very important friend and colleague. He is the manager of the Andean Country Group and representative for Colombia of the Inter-American Development Bank. I would like each one of you to give us a brief introduction to set the tone and to set the scene. What are we talking about when we talk about a migration crisis in Colombia? Felipe, ayúdanos con los números. ¿Cuáles son los
Help us
números
with
que
the
tiene
numbers,
Colombia?
which are the numbers that Colombia has right now. What's going on? How many Venezuelans are? Which are the dimension of this problem and this great opportunity that we have right now? First of all, thank you very much, Concordia. Great for every one of you. I'm going to take 3 minutes to provide a size of the problem that we have right now. The Colombia wants to change into an opportunity. Otherwise, in Colombia, according with the data, we have 1,206,000 Venezuelans living permanently in Colombia. And then 60% of them are in the last 2 years we have regularized, which means that now we have a 35% of them that are in an irregular migration status in Colombia, and that's the numbers that we have now. 35% of them are in the borders, and the rest of them are inside of the country. That proportion was the country 2 years ago. And what is happening is we have a dispersion of the migrants in Colombia. So we have a comparison point. The 80% of them are in Lima, and it is helping us to accept and to understand what's going on in the municipalities. Despite of this dispersion, we have more than 80,000 municipalities in the around the border, and 7 departments that we have in the border with Venezuela. We have an 15 or 20% of increase in the last 2 years. Try to imagine each one of you from the cities that you're coming, that we have a growth of 25%. And how can they manage? Besides that, in permanent migrants, we have also become a transit position from the Venezuela. More than 3.7 Venezuelans that are leaving the United States, according with the United Nations data. A lot of them were coming from Venezuela and going to Ecuador, and they were going to Peru and other countries in Latin America, because this is not a phenomenon for Colombia but also for the countries in the region. We have more than 45,000 Colombians that are returning. They're coming back. They were living for many years in Venezuela in a really kind way. Venezuela was getting all those Colombians. Now, right now, we have a 10% of that are coming back to Colombia, and also we have more than 45,000 migrants that daily are going and coming. This is called a pendular immigration. They're going from the border points. Now we have a mixture flow that is the biggest one in the world, and it's not saying this full of proud. We can compare with the situation like in Syria in 6 years. They have more than 3 million, and that was just 6 years. Bangladesh also they have more than 200,000. Cattle now start really well because they are helping all around the world. And right now we have most complex migratory crisis, not just in numbers but also the critical situations and the way all our brothers from Venezuela are arriving to the country. Right now in numbers we're having mothers and kids that all days a survival situation they're trying to cross the border. Concrete data: 5,500 Venezuelans that are crossing the border daily. Daily, 45,000 people are crossing the border. It's one of the most dense borders because the people are coming back 40,000. We have a stock of 5,000 people that are staying and keep going in the country, and we have more than 1,000 people that stayed in Colombia permanently.
It's all you. Give us a brief notion, a brief introduction of your point of view on what's going on in the region and concretely on the migration crisis with Venezuela.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria. It's wonderful to be here this afternoon. It's a pleasure to take part in such an important dialogue here at Concordia America Summit. This is a much-needed opportunity to share ideas and identify synergies across an impressive gathering of public and private leaders on how we can help those who have fled repression and chaos. Specifically, we must consider not only the short-term humanitarian needs of displaced populations, but also consider how to support them in the medium and long term to become self-sufficient, find livelihoods and education opportunities, and contribute to their host communities. First, a little bit about the United States government's role in this response. The State Department's Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, which I represent, has provided humanitarian assistance primarily to Colombian refugees and other displaced populations in the region for decades. We have rapidly employed that regional expertise to respond to the Venezuela crisis. In fact, PRM was the first US government organization to contribute to the Venezuelan regional response in 2017 with an initial contribution to UNHCR of $3 million. Today, the US is the largest donor to the Venezuelan humanitarian crisis response, with funding coming from both the State Department and the US Agency for International Development. The United States has provided more than $256 million in aid, including $213 million in humanitarian assistance to Venezuelans in more than a dozen countries throughout the region since 2017. This assistance provides life-saving aid and critical basic services to Venezuelans fleeing their country, including shelter, emergency food, and health assistance, safe drinking water, protection from violence and exploitation, and livelihoods and education opportunities. This US assistance complements the efforts of the countries in the region that so generously host Venezuelans. We recognize the tremendous efforts these governments and communities make every day to welcome their neighbors in need. We particularly want to recognize Colombia for its compassion and generosity in hosting over 1.3 million Venezuelans. The Venezuela crisis is one piece of a global challenge that humanitarians face. The scale and duration of current crises worldwide are unprecedented, compelling those of us in the humanitarian community to confront the reality that we cannot address global humanitarian needs alone. A crisis of this magnitude requires coordinated response by the international community. Still, resources are limited. How can we stretch the impact of our limited resources? And how can we and how can we improve the sustainability of our responses? And the sustainability of my remarks, while supporting the longer-term needs of vulnerable individuals, promoting self-reliance and social and economic inclusion is a critical part of this puzzle. By fostering social and economic inclusion of those fleeing instability, we can simultaneously reduce long-term dependence on humanitarian assistance, improve safety and stability for the most vulnerable, support host communities, and contribute to local economies. Development actors and governments have expertise in poverty alleviation, so strengthening self-reliance will necessarily require humanitarians to forge new and stronger relationships across the development and public sectors. The World Bank, through their Global Concessional Financing Facility, the GCFF, for refugee hosting countries, has been a thought leader on addressing these long-term development challenges created by refugee influxes. The World Bank's recent approval of a Colombia GCFF grant, which supports the regularization and integration of a mixed flow of individuals, presents an immense opportunity for Colombia to strengthen socioeconomic inclusion and harness the potential economic benefits of a growing population. We also thank the Inter-American Development Bank for approving grants for countries hosting displaced populations in Latin America and the Caribbean. In closing, while our immediate charge is saving lives, our long-term charge requires strengthening the coherence between humanitarian development and private sector to support the safety, well-being, and prosperity of individuals, communities, and nations.
Thank you, Carol. Rafael, este es un tema.
This is a subject, Rafael, that is really relevant, just touching the earth. Which was your vision of face in front of this subject, and it's a marvelous information that was shared this morning that they found that the BIP is sharing with a long-term focus, not trying to solve problems in the short term, but something to build, to face a situation that will have many years ahead of us to try to solve the impact that we're receiving right now in the region as well. Thank you, Maria, and thank you, Concord, and all the panelists for this opportunity for the bid. We want to share a bit of our work in this kind of really complex situation that we have right now, the massive immigration from Venezuela, not just Venezuelans, but also from many Colombians that are born from Colombia that are coming back to Colombia. Peruvians, Ecuadorians that went to Venezuela at that moment when Venezuela was a really prosperous and wealthy country, when they were envious of development. This is a tragedy. As Felipe said, it was providing some of the information. This is not about the amount of people and the short time lapse that is going on in the crisis. I would like to start also to complete the idea what the bid is doing. This is a big opportunity for Latin America. The Venezuelans, although the people that live in Venezuela, they will have 4 or 5 million in 1 more year, 2 more years. Nobody knows exactly, but the flow is not stopping. And as long as the economy is going to be destroyed, the rhythm that it has right now, they're going to keep expelling people that are looking for better opportunities. We have lived also in the Latin America in more favorable situations and vice versa. The Colombians were migrating massively to Venezuela in a much longer period of time. It was 10, 15 years. Was how many? We're calculating to be something between 2 and 3 million that migrated in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. So the biggest amount it was in the middle of the 80s, but that was creating a demographic situation that was changing monthly. Part of this increasement of the population, it was thanks to the work hand of the Colombians that were helping to the development of the country. So that is something that could happen here. Which are the risks? The first one is the massive impact in the short term. It's really hard for our economy, our Latin American economies, to absorb in a really important way the migration in such a short amount of time. And the impacts that this migration will have the first, the second year are going to be probably more negative than positive because they are going to affect the utilities, the public services, the capacity, the health, the education services. We're calculating that in the bank, we're calculating that just in Colombia, we could just face this situation in a fiscal way. They will have to use 0.7% of the GDP per year so they can face all the expenses that are needed to manage the impact in education and health. Colombia doesn't have that right now. So the consequence of this impact is going to be a diminish of the public services during a time. Just to provide an example, the assistance in the health centers in Bogota, for example, of Venezuelans, in some cases has doubled the amount of people that are going to the emergency rooms in Bogota. This is easy to imagine immediately how this is impacting the quality of the services in the short term. Now, if effectively we are going to take the measurements of the policies, not just in Colombia, but also in Ecuador, Peru, when the impact is really big and in the rest of the countries, the way we can absorb and can get this workforce that can create a 0.5 of the GDP each year, not counting with the taxes that they might pay once they are getting to the formal workforce, and this is just the beginning. So at the end, this is a great opportunity, but depends of the wisdom of the decision makers and the policies, the public policies that are the best for this situation. This is the big problem that we have right now. We can reject this immigration. It could become a safety problem, or we can accept this immigration. We can integrate it in our workforce, and we're going to have a demographic problem and impact on our development here in Colombia. That's right. The challenge, the historical challenge, is not less. The migration problem is one of the most important subjects in the public agenda here in Colombia. It's a huge challenge in a country that is trying to redefine itself after an inner conflict, one of the longest in the continent. We have a big challenge in economical development, but when we talk about specifically to embrace this crisis, to understand this situation as an opportunity to get some demographic opportunities and to strengthen our economy. So let's talk about the details and what is the means, which ones are the government plans in terms of the identification, the formalization of these Venezuelans, but cannot get into formal employment. The worst scenario will be that we can get into the informal economy. So we can make them to be part of the formal economy, so we can have some kind of compromises in the public and the private companies. The first thing that I want to talk about is a really complex subject because we weren't used to the reception of immigrations. We were expulsors of Colombians, and we were received with a lot of kindness in all the countries, especially in Ecuador and Venezuela. Right now we have not just a historical responsibility, but also an ethical imperative. We have transformed this ethical imperative to make progress in the policies, not just the humanitarian level. We have big challenges in water, education, and health. We are working also in this kind of second generation challenges. Why is like that? To understand something that Carol was saying, because we have a perspective of middle term. Some people say that this will finish soon, and maybe we have even if we have a change in Venezuela tomorrow. Some people that has been with us, like Manuela and Gabi, they had hundreds and thousands of Venezuelans, even though we can see a change, it will take some time for people to go back because we had to rebuild all the structures in Venezuela. That's why we have established 3 lines of work. The first one is to use better the technology so we can progress in the capabilities of the government with big data, so we can manage these opportunities, because none of our institutions were ready for that, not in institutional local level. And we want to recognize that the true heroes of this process resources, and hundreds of mayors in the small villages that are getting all the migration. I want to acknowledge their effort for the effort that they have carried out, to understand that those are the ones that are receiving all the stress and depression. We're working together with that, but they receive the biggest part of it. We need the technology to enable, to lower the cost of provide the service for the immigrants. Sometimes we getting them into regular economies that are taking advantage of the situation, that they can deceive the situation. The second one is security, because it's really important to improve the amount of people that are in crime activities here in Colombia. We have much people here. We have more Venezuelans that are involved in criminal activity. We have to recognize which one is the activity that we have to do with that. The third one, and the most important, is the social inclusion, including them in the social activity in Colombia. We have 33 activities, the different kind of lines that we can get into this activity. The characterization of them, to know, we can know which one are capabilities, convalidation of the titles, so we can know who has the capabilities, train a technical level, certification of those that have the capabilities and the skills, communication, so we can improve the communication in the working field, and to be sure that all the information is true, and we have a strategic plan in this matter. And also we are going to talk to them, and not just in the terms of the humanitarian crisis, and also using the second generation resources with the many sponsors, involving the private sector, and Concordia can help us with this to become this an opportunity.
In these matters, and sorry, switching back and forth. Sorry, you have a tremendous experience in these matters, in many years of work in different continents and different countries. How do we go beyond the humanitarian help? How do we unlock these public and private alliances so that really there can be a container that supports all of this public policy that a country fosters? What is your experience in those terms? What are the takeaways and the learnings that you've had throughout the years? And concretely, in terms of Colombia, what are you planning in terms of the U.S. government of doing to help us foster these partnerships and to go beyond humanitarian aid?
Thank you, Maria. Globally, I see some similarities. The situation in Jordan in particular, thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of Syrians in the Syrian crisis fled to Jordan and to Turkey in need of protection, in need of basic services. And those countries responded very much like Colombia has, with generosity and welcoming their neighbors. The integration of those new, the refugees and the migrants that are coming in, integrating into local communities, was really the touchstone of being successful in not only alleviating the suffering that the refugees and the migrants have brought with them, but also in bolstering the economy, bolstering the workforce in their own countries. So, for example, and we just had a meeting with the World Bank and the IDB and CAF and some other in the private sector, and the banking system in Turkey, and knew that there were 3 million refugees coming. But they worked with the cellular company, and the cellular company decided to sell cell phones to refugees. They may not have a location, they may not have a home, but they knew that this was going to be important. So then you have that many more people with those devices. You have to train people to repair them. It creates the possibility for jobs with things like delivery services and things like that. In Jordan, similar situation. While there are camps in Jordan, refugee camps in Jordan, the majority of the people have been integrated. The children are going to school. They are able to access health care. And the ability of someone to be trained and start working, it creates stability, it creates normalcy, and it allows that person to contribute back to their society. This is not to say that that was only for the refugees that showed up. It was also the host communities that we focused on. So we can't have one without the other. We have to make sure that the host communities know that the programs that are coming in and being started are not just for those who are fleeing. It's a whole of government effort, it's a whole of community effort, but it is something that can be successful if everyone is participating.
Thank you. Rafael, hablemos de las ciudades. Las ciudades.
Let's talk about the cities, Rafael. These are the cities that are receiving all this migration. There are a lot of projects that the bank is leading in terms of impact, bonds of social impact. Which are those topics that we can develop at city level and metropolitan implementation so that this can be a great channel promoting opportunities for this population? That's right. The bank has had great activity during the last month, working along with the governments and with the regions. I'd like to welcome the Chancellor of Colombia, and we have been working with him quite a bit here in Bogota. In terms of looking at the most important public policies, this has been a contribution right here in Bogota, as well as in other scenarios along the region. Maybe the most important concept is to providing stability to the migrants in the sense of staying in the country. So some of them, after 2 years, it's very important to extend those permits so that the entrepreneurs can consider that okay, it's an important investment to invest in these people because they're going to be able to stay. Number two, we have been working in regards to the diagnosis in terms of health and education and thinking about in the mid and long term. In the short term, it's a problem, but medium term, this the systems we need to confront this in a stable way. This requires financing, but it also requires new policies. It's not just about increasing the number of classrooms and the number of beds. We're talking about confronting illnesses that didn't exist before in Colombia that existed in Venezuela. For example, in Venezuela, malaria was eradicated in the 50s. It was the first country to get rid of this. Now Venezuela, it's exporting this disease. Unfortunately, that's a byproduct of that migration problem. The second thing that we have been working in is public policies, and specifically at the end, we're probably going to mention the issue of this labor market, how we can include this migrants from Venezuela in this market. And for this, we have some instruments. We have been working with technical trainings. We have some financing instruments that we have been trying to focus in order to help this massive migration. We just approved a fund where the bank has included $100 million of ordinary capital. We're looking for donors, and from the European Union, we have a pledge, we have an offer that it's surrounding $40 million. And there are other countries that could be promoting some funds. And Moreno president highlighted a fund of $1 billion from bank capital as well as donors. So we are focusing on this. We're not going to stop. We're going to continue focusing on this. These are resources that complement the World Bank resources. The Assistant Secretary already mentioned that, and the multilateral perspective, we are from our nations trying to support this difficult situation. We know that the resources are not enough. We know that there will never be enough, but we need to focus or we need to have a strategic focus and make sure that these resources get to the points that they need to get to. You also said that the cities are really important. The majors are the ones that are receiving the most immediate impact of this crisis, and it this is not equally distributed in all nations. There are some areas of high concentrations, and these are the areas where we need to work with in a really specific way, really with surgical precision if necessary. That's the work that we have been developing with this follow up. We've been following up this great effort in the region. Okay, now we're seeing this announcement where it says, okay, you please need do not extend too much because you're running out of time. I wish that we had more time because this is really important. Now, in order to finish, I would like to ask the same question to all of you. We talked about the multilateral organizations. We talked about government support from the U.S. We talked about public policies from Colombia. How can you prepare society? Which are those important, important issues, so that Colombians can also be a part of this great task, that it's not a minor one? Which is that message, Felipe? First of all, the role of the media, Semana magazine, including Venezuela, along with the efforts, for example, with what is happening in Cucuta, and for example, what's happening in Barranquilla. This is really clear so that people can understand what's really going on, so that they can understand the possibility. There's a possibility of helping. There's a great strength in the NGOs and the private sector. I believe that we need to take advantage of that. If it wasn't for that social contribution from hundreds of ONGs NGOs that have helped us, the capability of the state would have been surpassed. So I believe that right here we have the human capital. In order to do that, we need a bigger coordination in order to have a more responsive, a better response.
What are those messages, final messages for the Colombian society, in your experience and in your opinion? We talk about the public policy, but we seldom speak about the responsibility of citizens receiving this migration and welcoming them into our country. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would say that they are going to make the difference in the success or failure, long-term success or failure. I think that they have done an unbelievably phenomenal job of welcoming so many new people into their communities. As Felipe said, the organizations that are in town, the faith community, civil society, NGOs, et cetera, but the everyday people who pass Venezuelan or Colombian who has returned, helping them find shelter, helping them find a community kitchen, helping them find some place that, looking at the school system. Tomorrow we're going to I'm going to witness signing an agreement with the Minister of Education and bringing the children into schools. Those basic daily interactions are going to make the difference. And so far, Colombia has been an example of, all the Colombians have been an example of welcoming.
Thank you. Rafael, el broche de oro te corresponde.
Rafael, now it's your turn to close. Okay, we're the same. We're the same. We are divided by a border in the 19th century that divided a single nation. The great Colombia was made of Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama. And the problems in history caused these nations to break up into four nations, but we're talking about the same people at the end of the day. And at the end of the story, I would say that we have two good arguments. I would like to imagine 20, but now I would like to focus on only two in regards to why Colombians should accept this and embrace this opportunity. The first one, it's because we're the same people. It's the same territory, the same perspectives. We've had different positions, and the number two is because of self-interest. Venezuela is actually losing people. Venezuela is losing its youth. It's missing economical opportunities, regardless of the disaster of their economy. This is highlighted because of the fact that a lot of young population is leaving the country, and they're coming here. They're going to Peru, or they're going to Ecuador, or they're moving to Chile or Argentina or to Brazil or other countries in Central America. So it's a great opportunity. Colombia grows basically because of investment and because of work. Unfortunately, not so much because of productivity, which is what we would like to see. We're normally looking for that, but for now, Colombia has grown, and it has grown in a moderate rhythm, reasonable rate at 3.5% in average, just because people invest and they believe in the country, and because there's availability in the workforce in order to absorb that investment. And we're talking about opportunities for young people. This is a great opportunity for Colombia to increase that growth, and that means that Colombia could grow, instead of an average of 3.5, we could grow 4% per year. Accumulated growth year by year at 4%, Colombia in 20 years could reach 20 to $25,000 per capita at that growth rhythm, approximately. It's still under what believe it would be its potential, but now we have this flow of young population that's going to motivate the economy, not just for reasons related to community or related that we are brothers, we're actually brothers. It's because of self-interest. Colombia is one of those countries in the region that they're they're receiving this incredible gift because of incredible reasons, but they're going to see that positive effect, and Venezuela will be missing out. So I believe that there's no way out. We're going to see problems. We're going to have difficulties. Some people are going to think that this Venezuelan migration is negative because they're going to take away jobs. They're going to receive bad salaries. Yes, that could be a problem, but we're going to have to come up with a solution. We're going to have to solve that. At the end, the method or the results are going to be really positive for this region. Unfortunately, I cannot say the same for my own country, which is Venezuela. Thank you very much. There you go.